Tune in to the podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Souls of Many.
So how do we go about changing that, making a difference? Yes, our panel discussion today, I thank you so much for that, because we are making a difference. We're united from different parts of the world, have different stories to tell, but at least we are united and making a difference. So my experiences are diverse because I'm involved with many different cultures in service. So I'm invited to many private events of all sorts of things with families and gatherings, and all I see in my circle is happiness. I remember graduating from Proviso West. We were all united. There was no criticism in any sort of way in terms of race, in terms of color. I didn't experience that at Roosevelt either. I think the only experiences I had in knowing any difference, because of where I was born in a small town, we had no electricity, an outhouse, what have you. I didn't know what an airplane was. I thought it was aliens, things like that, till I discovered from the old wise folk who taught me a lot. To elaborate on the few points that Chuck, mentioned about his father, no family is perfect. But one thing that really struck me, struck a point in my heart, what Chuck mentioned, was he decided not to be like his father. So he decided not to do certain things, and he wanted to be better. So with me, I decided when I was very, very young that I would not fear. And that was due to me learning that the next town was Croatian. They were allies of the Nazis in World War II, and we were allies of the States. And then for the Civil War to happen here, for my great country where I live here and I love and respect, I did not have hatred for the country. I had such sadness for the leaders in the nations, in the United Nations and such, and I don't discuss politics much, to oppress us as such. And I also did not have, I think, I'm not sure who it is, whose father has a green card. I love my country so much. My parents became citizens immediately. My sister and I did not. We respected where we were, but we couldn't get a dual citizenship at the time. So we kind of just, did not do that. When the Civil War struck, I immediately had to get citizenship, which I didn't mind, getting. But I could not go back to my country where I was born. I was a minority there. I said, I have a passport. No, you have to go to Serbia. I'm not from Serbia. My family in the war had to escape from the Croatian towns of my father's family to Serbia over the mountains, and they were oppressed because not of their religion, because they came from Croatia. So this is pretty much a mixed up, polluted world. And, as Michael said, in terms of experiences, our experiences are on such a open-minded level of education that we've gained, and the knowledge that we have gained uniting together on this panel. I only had, in terms of color, experiences, I think 4 or 5 times. And that was when I was my uncle was an orthopedic surgeon, was taking us to the Capitol to get our shots to come to the United States. And I saw an African-American, very dark African-American male, probably college age, but what did I know? And I said, Uncle, where is he from? I was curious, just curiosity. He said, a lot of South African students come here from abroad, to get their education. But his voice and the tone of his voice was as a leader and educator, nothing negative about it.
Now, that is such a great point, Sue. That is such a great point.
Yeah. One experience I had involved my son at the age of, let's say, when we were going to, he started talking at 6 months. He's a very gifted boy. So we were heading to, let's say, DC, I think, for a conference. And my parents, being the immigrants that really worry, did not allow me to have any sitters or to have my son go outside when he was little. Fear of catching a cold, fear of germs, really kind of, a different perspective. So I take my son with my husband on a business trip, and we're at O'Hare, and he's in his little buggy with a pacifier. He always had a pacifier. And we were waiting in line to board, and he pointed his finger at the woman and her daughter or son. I can't recall. I think it was her daughter. They were African American. And he pointed at them, and he was talking at this time, 6 months. And he said, "What's that?" And I wanted to die. My husband and I looked at each other and we're like, my goodness. And I apologized. That lady could have been acting differently. It depends on the individuality and the person. I explained to her, "I'm sorry, ma'am. He has not been out at all into the world. He doesn't know anything about color, race, ethnicity, or anything." I said, "He's been secluded in a home." And this is his first time out, But turning it around, if that woman had some issues, I would be dead, or I don't know what would happen to us. So it's your level of education and perception, and I'm not talking about college degrees. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about your surroundings, and we need to make our surroundings different. We need to make a difference. The powers cannot control, because there is only one leader, and it is not the church. He is our church. I experienced, when I came to this country, his father passed, as I mentioned, by being killed by the partisans or the Chetniks, not to bore you with the details. My father was the youngest of 8, and my grandmother was left with 8 children. When the revolution hit, the communist revolution, and the partisans split from the Chetniks, my father's 2 very active brothers, one very active, the eldest, escaped to the United States. My father was 2 years old in World War II. And when he came here, and we didn't know, he came here 1 year before, worked 3 jobs to make a living so my mother and my sister and I could come to this country. And when we came to this country, we had a very, very disappointing and tragic experience. We went to my uncle's house. My father was working. We went to our uncle's house. We thought maybe, my father never told us anything. He always was respectful, humble, never complained, never criticized to this day, any culture, any race, or anything. And he's been through a lot. He's been through many, many, many tragedies. And we went to my uncle's house, and he kicked us out of his house. He accused my father of being a communist at the age of 2. And then we became members of the church. The families from our small village were here. There were about 7, 8 families we knew in our neighboring area of Bellwood, Berkeley. And they all welcomed us with open arms. They said, "Stay in church. You'll be okay. Names Day, you can attend my house." One said, "You can't attend Names Day at our house." Yada, yada, yada. And they kicked us out of the church. My uncle was on the board, and the board members, there were Chetniks, And here I am, in a church. So it was very difficult for me. And my eyes opened wide about the church. I watched very closely as a young child of 7, 8, that church really wasn't church. So we became members of another church up north. But what I did was what Chuck did. Even in that perspective of being attacked and having those experiences, I said, I'm going to go to all churches. If I see happiness, I don't care if it's a Lutheran, whatever it is. And that's what I've done. My son as well, and that's how I raised my kids. They are members of ECRC, attended Timothy Christian here in Elmhurst, and they're Christian disciples. And nothing will change that. My son has slept and went on mission trips to Honduras. I'm not happy about some of his political commentary. He is a writer, columnist for The Independent at U of I in Champaign. And he's also a writer for The Music Review. But how eloquently he puts these pieces together with some of his articles that I may share with you at times, and uniting people and saying lives matter. Yes, Black lives matter, but lives matter. Or how the rappers, dealt with their neighborhoods or the hood, dealing with what they had to deal with through their music. Mm-hmm. So these leaders are not just an age level. I wouldn't label them as, our leaders. We are all leaders until our dying day. Because
I couldn't agree with that more. I think that sometimes we shift the burden and pass the buck. And I had a friend the other day tell me that, my daughter is protesting. She's on the diversity council for a big a publicity agency. And she was downtown and I really like that. And that's what this is about. It is for all young people to get out there and do this, and they have changed the world. And to my point earlier, I think that Sam's generation, which is millennial generation, are so passionate about what they do, what they want to do. They go to school to be a doctor, and they'll end up on television and the media because that's where their passion is. They're going to do what they want to do. They're going to find their passion and work towards it until it hits the mark. But to my point, they get out there and they try and make a difference through protesting and having voices heard, which is what I'm seeing in this Black Lives Matter movement. It's not that other lives don't matter, but please understand that Black people matter too. And so now you see it all across the globe. You see folks in Sweden and Norway and all different countries coming out and saying and protesting peacefully to have their voice heard that what's going on is not right. If it were white people or Italians or Irish or whatever ethnicity it may be, if they were being ostracized and treated the way that marginalized groups are being treated, I'd be the first one standing in the march, because they matter. People matter. And so I don't think that folks should say, Black lives, blue lives matter, all lives matter, and counter that point. I love it when they say, okay, all lives matter. Yes, Black lives matter also, and then the point is taken and it's understood. But some people don't do that in this day and age. They see Black lives matter as Black people rising up and wanting power and control of everything. That's not the point. The point of Black Lives Matter is to point out systemic racism, injustices, and disparity. And then let's try and work together to make it right. Because you know what? At the end of the day, if you've got crime, wherever it may be, it's going to spill over in your community too. Because it's just growing. And crime and poverty, sometimes, unfortunately, in the mass portion and proportion, they go together. And when you breed poverty and systemic injustices, which are racist in nature, then you're going to always have that. You'll always have that. And so, I don't know, racism is a very hard topic to define and, well, not to define to me. It's just hard to tackle and get people on the same page to start seeing people for people and not marginalize or disenfranchise intentionally because it adds to socioeconomic unbalance. And when you've got that, you get just a world of chaos. So that said, I wanted to ask a couple more questions in regards to privilege. I want to ask a question about, well, let's just do privilege right now. Who on this panel, and I don't care if you're white or Black or whatever, who feels that they can walk into their privilege at certain times? And what does that mean? Sam?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I feel that, I come from sort of an upper middle class family. I've had an incredibly privileged life. When I lived in London, my dad ran the Royal Botanic Gardens, so I grew up on the grounds of the Royal Botanic Gardens. Incredibly privileged life. I think people in general get they bristle a little bit when you tell them that they have privilege, because life is hard no matter what you're doing. Making your way in finding anything is difficult. But having privilege is not undermining the difficulties and the challenges of your life. I think the easiest way that I can recognize that I have privilege when I think about it is, obviously I lived in England, so we would take summer trips to sort of Spain and Italy. I really fell in love with the country of Italy in general, still my favorite country to this day. And it was talking to certain African-American friends of mine when I told them I really would like to maybe retire in Italy one day or something like that. They said, "Oh, I'm not going to come visit you then." And I said, "Well, what's going on there?" And over time, I realized that Italy is among treatment of Black tourists, shall we say, one of the worst countries. And that is my privilege recognized, in that I can walk into any restaurant with my girlfriend at the time and order drinks, and we get the same service, and I can step out of the hostel at 11 p.m. and just go for a walk, and nobody's going to challenge me, anything like that. So those are sort of the ways that I can sort of recognize my privilege, but that doesn't undermine sort of my push to be a better writer, my push to make better content, to try and get a job, and that sort of stuff. All of those things are difficult, but I do recognize that I am golfing with a handicap, as it were.
I get it.
Bridgette, can I make a comment?
Absolutely.
All right. So from an African-American perspective, when we say the word privilege, all we really mean is that you don't have to work at proving who you are at first, or work as hard. I give you one example. Every new home that my wife and I lived in was a new community with people pretty much our same age. And even though they may be different parts of the country, blah, 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 we all had things in common: kids, young family. Our last house, as we'll call our retirement home, we moved into a community where my wife and I are probably one of the youngest, part of the younger group now. It's an older community. And when we first moved in there, we moved to townhomes, and our neighbor was an older white couple. And after we bought the home, my mother and my sister-in-law and my wife was showing them the townhome, and my neighbor came out and came out of her house and was looking at my mother and who was in her 90s at the time, and my sister-in-law and my wife. And she looked at him and said, "I wonder what you guys are doing here." They said, "Well, we bought this townhome next door to you." So I wasn't there. So they were older, in their 80s. Turns out that the gentleman was a undersecretary for the Department of the Navy. I had no idea until he passed. But what I did to make it different, what you call extra work, went over, introduced myself, said I'm a pastor, I'm a police chaplain. And every week I would take out their trash for them and bring it back in for them. Just to make a short story, finish a long story, make it short. He brought his daughters over, rang my doorbell. I was wondering what was he doing. Rang my doorbell, and he had 3 of his daughters with him. And he introduced me to his daughter, said, "This is the best neighbor I've had, and I've lived here for 30 years. And he didn't live long after that. But I mean, just the impact that you could have by, proving that you are just as good of a neighbor. But the reward was that, he said out of living in that neighborhood for 30 years, I was his best neighbor. But again, privilege just means that you don't have to work at proving your character. People just assume the best in you before you get an opportunity to prove the worst in you.
That's a great story. And that goes back to our humanity and just understanding one another. I like that. Did anyone else have anything to comment on in that area?
Well, I can add a few things. I was sitting here just thinking, Oh, well, I never really felt anything or had any experiences in that respect. But I just think that one comment I wanted to add was I'm just blessed that I had the privilege to come to this country. Because when the Civil War happened and my grandmother was missing in the woods in the 90s, she was one of maybe none, I think her and one more, that survived. And so being able to be here is truly a blessing. I've always felt that way. It's a blessing. It's the land of the free and the home of the brave. And that's all I wanted to add to that. Just privileged to be here. It's a privilege.
Sometimes growing up in America, which is one of the most, it is the, I don't want to say the best, I don't want to boast, but I think this, and I've been around the globe, I think this is one of the most beautiful places on the planet. We've got so many different people here and so many different cultures, and I love learning about people. I love talking to different people. I'm not afraid to walk down the street with a person that looks different than me. I'm not afraid to dine with people that's different than me. But that's my story. I want more people to not be afraid of people, learn folks' culture, cross the aisle, so to speak, and be peaceful and respectful about it. Because we could learn so much and we could have so much more fun and be so much better than what's been on display over the centuries or over recent times. We're better than this. I know we are at the core. I have so many different friends in so many different nationalities. I just enjoy learning about people. I enjoy eating what they eat. I'll look over and say, what the heck is that? Let me try that, And some people are more adventurous than others, but that's just, how I move about life and how I try to teach. I'm an adjunct professor. I also teach entrepreneurship, and I have a gaggle of nieces and nephews and my son's friends. And I just like to impart things on them so that they can go out and change the world for the better. And I wish that people could understand and stop fearing what they don't know. You don't have to embrace what you don't know, but you do and you should learn about what you don't know. And then we can denounce ignorance and move in a better way. I am so grateful to be in this country. I am so grateful to be a part of its development and innovation. My people, like I said, come from a long line of music. And Muddy Waters, B.B. King, Bonnie Raitt, all the greats say that had it not been for the Chapman family, we wouldn't have blues, we wouldn't have R&B, we wouldn't have popular music. Those were my people. And so that makes me proud to say, wow, even though times were tough, even though there was slavery and we didn't have much freedom, you can still embrace the goodness of life and touch other people's lives. So all these centuries later, my family has touched music and musicality. That's crazy to me once I think about it. And each and every one of us has a legacy to that extent. We've got something in us that we could teach someone else and give that to the world. But instead, sometimes we fight each other so hard on the unknown and we get such a disastrous result. And, if I had to change the world, I'd open up more dialogue like this. And just understanding where people are coming from. I know that privilege is one of those things that is not to be taken for granted, and some of us do. But when you get that privilege, and you have privilege, and from an African-American perspective, I've not had too much privilege, but I'd like to think that I've created my own privilege. because now what I can do once I got my education, I am privileged to go places where I couldn't before and articulate my knowledge. And so that is privilege personally to me. Maybe not the world, but to me. I am privileged enough to get in and make the best of every situation, no matter how hard it is. And sometimes it's overwhelmingly difficult. But I can make the best of that situation, and then I can go out and make a living for myself. And once I make a living for myself, I can live where I desire to live, where I want to live. You know, it may be harder in some places because they don't know who I am. And it happened to me when I bought my first house. My neighbors knew how I financed the house. They knew what car I drove. They knew where I worked. They knew every single thing about me. I have a neighbor that just moved across the street from me. I don't know them yet. But moving in this neighborhood, they thought it was imperative that they know everything about me before I move in. I'm grateful for my experiences. Everybody didn't have that experience, but I'm hoping that, you know, we can move through life and gain some greater perspective in regards to that. I do want to ask two more questions, and then I'm going to let you guys go and let our audience kind of mull over this racism discourse that we've had. I'm curious to know, when you hear racist verbiage, what do you do? So I could tell you what I do, but I want to hear from the panel. What do you do when you hear racist verbiage? Because everybody's heard it. You know, whether someone says, oh, I would never say that, I would never be around people. You could be inadvertently in a group setting and someone may say something. But I want to know your reaction. What do you do when you hear racist verbiage?
I'll give you an answer. When I was younger, I was probably passive when I heard comments that were inappropriately made. But I think you know me enough, Bridgette, that I'm pretty opinionated, and I'm willing to share that opinion, whether people agree with it or not. I don't tolerate it. It's just offensive. I apologize for the phone ringing. I think it's offensive. I let people know. I just like to be open. Just as a comment, Bridgette, I
think we're having a little bit of technical difficulty with Chuck coming in, but it's important to know that he's saying that he doesn't tolerate the comments that
I have difficulty with, in that
we got Chuck back.
I don't think a kid from the South Side, I have trouble viewing myself as living a privileged life. I turned out okay. I'm happy where I'm at. I've gotten better than I deserve. But I have difficulty with the idea that I lived a privileged life at all. It was a hard knock life.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that too, Chuck. People see privilege differently, and once you kind of look back on your life, you say, well, I didn't experience that way, the way other folks are perceiving that I have all this privilege. It was hard, you know, it was hard for me. I get that. What I also get is the flip side of that, in that, okay, it's been hard for me too, really hard. I'm talking really hard. I lost both of my parents when I was in college. I was on my own. That's it. Got to work, got to make a way. And so didn't have a saving grace there. And a lot of people are in that situation. But there's another variable. When you don't look like me, things are a little bit, or they can be a little bit different. Just gaining access to things could be a little bit or a little less difficult. Just because of the institutionalized racism and ignorance that people have towards other people in other cultures. And so there's a difference, and it might not be the privilege that you come to think, because you wouldn't really know it unless you hear it from others or have experienced it being with another. Such as, just going in stores, getting, not being shown the house that you're really asking for if you don't know a Black realtor or a realtor that's not racist, or have prejudice. When I first bought my small home that I'm in, and I've been there for almost 27 years, hard to believe, I had the income to live wherever the heck I wanted to live in this town. All they would show me are homes that were smaller, and I would inquire about, other houses on the other side of town, and they would say, well, it's really hard because those don't come up that often. They don't come up that often. I go on Redfin and I look up the values of some of the houses when I bought my house and when they sold and the frequency. And I just started doing that because I tell you, every 20 years or so, I start looking at where am I going to move. And I say, I'll be doggone. They paid $10,000 more than I paid and got 2,000 extra square feet. So it's like those things just make me angry. They make me just want to write legislation around, that just the disparity, just nuts, just the inequities, are just so large. And this generation that was showing me the homes, the realtors that when I was looking at my home weren't very young. And they weren't very progressive in thought. So I just leaned to because that's all you could find. And so they found this one particular house, and I've been there for 27 years. I'm very happy with my community. I love my community, but the one regret that I do have is I should have bought more house. I should have bought more house, and I should have been smarter. And I kick myself backwards in the shin a little bit for not doing my homework and not doing my research. But I didn't know.
If I could add. Sorry, Michael, go ahead.
No, please, go ahead.
I just wanted to offer something quick. Me and Bridgette's son are really good friends to the point where we shared a locker in high school. And one day I remember him coming in, he was a little flustered. And I was like, what's wrong? It's just a Wednesday. And he was like, this is BS. You get to wear your hat all the time. I used to always wear, the fitted caps in high school. And I said, yeah, what of it? And he said, every time I put on the hat, security guard tells me to take it off. Every single time. And these are not just, white security guards. We went to Park River Forest. These are Mexican security guards, Black security guards, all types of different people. And he said to me, just for today, wear your hat all day and tell me at the end of the day when you come to get your coat, how many times you were asked to take it off. So I come at the end of the day and I said, one guard told me one time to take my hat off. I walked around the corner and I put my hat right back on. And I think that is the best way that I can define privilege to people, because he said to me that every time he'd put it on his head, a guard told him to take it off immediately. And I walked past plenty of security guards that day that said absolutely nothing to me. So that's my best definition of privilege, I would say.
That's a good story. It's a really good story. Michael, you were going to chime in?
Yeah, I want to chime in about what do you do when you hear something racist. I don't hear a lot of racist conversations around me because I think people may be a little leery about saying negative things about African Americans in front of me. But it's critical that when anybody hears anything that's racist, not just racism is not a black issue exclusively, as our sister from Eastern Europe has been expressing. If somebody says something derogatory about any group that has been marginalized, or even with African Americans that say all police are racist. Well, that's not true. My brother is a retired Bellwood cop. He's black, and he cares greatly about his African American people. But I think you have to speak up. You have to say something. Let people know it's not acceptable to be sexist, racist, homophobic, whatever it is in front of you. If they're comfortable having a racist dialogue in front of you, that means that you haven't done your best to either distinguish yourself, that's not your opinion and value. And I think those are things that you can't be afraid of. And again, it goes back to home training. My parents grew up in the segregated South. They moved from Louisiana to Maywood. They had to basically pay a bribe to get their mortgage because black people, one time, Bridgette, I don't know if anybody told you this, you couldn't buy a home, couldn't finance your home without paying a bribe to a local bank in the neighboring community. I won't name the community, but they had to give the guy some money on the table just to get their home finance. So they experienced racism and segregation, at the highest level in segregated South. But we were taught to love everybody, judge people by their character. And there were black kids I couldn't hang with, and there were white kids I couldn't hang with. It didn't matter. It was based on their character. So again, if you, as we learn now with this terrorism issue, if you see something, say something.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And you are absolutely right. I have been, and Chuck, I liked what you said also. You don't tolerate that, Growing up, you're kind of like, they're calling these people these names, and, you just kind of in there, you don't really say anything, including myself. I've been guilty of that while growing up. And today, you will not come in my house spewing anything. You will not be at dinner and start talking about any group of people in any way that is derogatory or inflammatory in nature that could really cause harm or hurt anyone. I just don't tolerate it. So I've heard plenty of, derogatory terms, but I don't tolerate it. I don't, and I won't, and so if that means that I've got to leave, I'm going to leave, but I'm not going to just get up and leave and say, I'm going to excuse myself and leave. I'm going to tell you what I think about it first, and then I'm going to leave because I don't like it. And I've done it before. I haven't had any recent incidents or anything like that because people, I think they know where I stand. But I've had some incidents in the past where, groups were talking about, Middle Eastern people or talking about whites in a certain way. In our culture, we talk about one another. We just call it running the dozens. So we could say anything to one another and it's not going to really hurt. But in regards to other people's races and cultures, when they're called names, even if they're bad people, I'd rather you pick a bad person name than a racist term that is foul. For some people, I just say, they're horrible human beings. I don't call them, I think back in the day, the term was for white people that were bad were hunkies or crackers or whatever. I'm not going to call you that because you're a white person. If you're a bad white person, I'm just going to say you are a horrible human being. You're just horrible, aberrance. You just abhorrent. You're just awful, just foul, bad. I'm going to call the spade a spade. But I'm not going to drudge up a racist term to make you feel bad or another person feel bad or puff myself up, because it really doesn't. But this one over here, I'm going to have my say. I'm going to let you know how I think, and then I'm going to say, now I'm going to leave because I don't want to be part of this. But if you guys want to get back together again and we don't have to talk about this or call people out like that, I'm good to go. I'm your first girl here that's going to have fun.
Bridgette, that's why I cringe when I hear rap music that use the N-word, because even though we say, oh, it doesn't hurt so much when it's not a hurtful word when I say it to a fellow African American, but to me it just gives license to everybody to use it. I don't think it should be used at all to another African American, or again, I'm just riding down the street and have the windows down and I see some brothers playing music with N-word, or white kids, whatever. It makes me cringe that is an acceptable word in some people's mind, and they think because of the person's color who's saying it, it's not damaging. It actually is residue in our subconscious from slavery, and I don't. Again, you didn't actually bring that up, but it kind of remind me that part of this whole concept of racism is based on how you view yourself. And when we hear about how we treat each other, again, it goes back to how we were taught to dislike, distrust, and hate our own selves. And I think as soon as we develop a love for ourselves, it makes it easier for us to love other people.
I get it. I get that part. And I'm going to offer you a counter to that as well, being African American and, saying the N-word, I guess the best way that I could put it is, when I was born, I was the first baby of the year. And so you get all these accolades and prizes and gifts, you're in the paper and so forth. And my mother gave birth to me at a prestigious hospital in the area, which was Hurst Hospital. And so, most people were going to Cook County or Westlake to be born, but, not many people went to this, affluent suburbs to give birth. But she ended up, her OBGYN called her in there and she gave birth to me. And when I was born, the nurses said, well, do we call the papers? Do we do this? Can we get our prizes together and so forth? And she's hearing them converse outside the door. And the doctor says to the nurses, she's just another nigger. And she said, I held you in my arms and I held you up so high when that newspaper came, because they don't know this one. She's not, And so, instance when I was 10, I clearly remember watching the news right after the civil rights era, and things were getting a little shaky politically. And I asked my father, I said, why are they doing and saying all these things, about Black people and so forth and so on? And he said, well, what is it that you specifically want to know? And I said, what is a nigger? And so he said, look it up in the dictionary. And I looked it up. Now I still have the dictionary. It's a blue dictionary about yay thick. And the definition of nigger was like a low down, dirty. It wasn't the definition that's in the dictionary today. And he said, now, tell me who you are. And I said, I'm not a nigger. So today, to your point, Mike, that word, it doesn't really mean anything to me, because that was not who I was. That is not who I am. You can call me whatever you want to call me. And if I answer to Bridgette, I'm okay, But all that other stuff, if it doesn't fit me, then I know that's not who I am. And in regards to rappers, rapping, nigga this, nigga that, and I say the word because N-word, you need to hear it sometimes. Sometimes we need to just put it out there and hear it. It's N-I-G-G-E-R, that's nigger. And in the Black community, it's N-I-G-G-A, nigga. So you might walk up to someone and say, instead of saying, girl, stop playing, you might say, nigger, please, you know? And it's not the Nigger, that's the racist term. Black folks has redefined it to nigger. So that said, that really doesn't hurt or mean anything to me either. I don't want anyone calling me that wants it to be interpreted as racist, and to put other people's down, that I have a problem with. But I don't like derogatory terms in general, but I know that in our Black culture, our African American culture, you know, we joke around a lot, and that's just been historical. You know, all we had was laughter and music and putting our money together to get food to feed one another in hard times. And so we talk about everything, and we laugh about everything. But now it's gotten to the point that, you know, it's politically incorrect to say certain terms in your own community, in your own circle, that doesn't mean what others interpreted it to be. However, I get your point, because when you put it in music and you've got all cultures, you know, listening to it, now it's a problem. Now it's a problem because you're saying it and it can be misconstrued. And I don't want you to say it. Just let's not say it at all. So I get that part when it gets into the arts and infused in our culture so much that that word comes back up and it gives everybody the right to say it. I get that we better just let it go, and not say it at all. But I guess from my personal standpoint, again, if someone calls me a nigger, means nothing to me. Absolutely nothing. You can say it over and over in a loop, in a cycle. You can come in my face and say it means nothing to me, because you're trying to provoke me to feel something that you're feeling, which is inferior and fearful. And I'm not inferior, and I'm not scared. I'm just not. So it means nothing to me. But if I'm with my girlfriends and, you know, I hear the guys in the back and, you know, it's just Black people in there, and they redefine the term to Nigga, and someone says, nigga, you better go on somewhere, you better this, that. That's part of the language that, you know, we just do what we do in our culture. We could speak a whole nother language. Ebonics, I'm not afraid to say Ebonics. I can speak Ebonics so well, it would blow anyone's mind. But I know how to command English language also in the proper settings. I speak Ebonics when I'm with my people, like Italians might speak Italian, or Polish people might speak Polish, and Spanish people might speak Spanish, you know? We speak Ebonics. It is all kind of broke. And when I say all kind of broken language, but it's fun and we know exactly what we're saying, because it's a language that we understand. So I feel, you know, a certain kind of way about the N-word, and that's just my point of view. But I would never, in public settings, you know, condone the behavior, listen to people say that. But if it's in a context, in a private setting where we understand what we're talking about, it's all good to me, because it's part of our culture and taking back the Nigger to Nigga. And so we redefined it anyway. It doesn't mean that. It just means that you're just acting up and you acting crazy, or you're wilding out, or you're, you know, it doesn't make sense to me and you're gonna have to explain this to me, please. You know, that's what it means to me. But I wouldn't dare have this conversation, you know, with all my white friends, because they would not know where I was coming from with it in the first place. And I'm sure they would be like, oh, can we say it? And can we like get in this conversation like that? And that's where African Americans and Black people say no. So, because it's Nigger, it's not Nigga, and it's not the Ebonics that you speak, because you don't speak Ebonics. So we're not going to understand it to that extent. So I don't know if that even made sense to anyone, but Sam is shaking his head. Did that make sense to you, Sam?
It did make sense to me. I want to speak. I think Chuck may have lost power and dropped out of the call for a second. But yeah, to speak to what Michael said, I found I've always been a poet and really interested in words in general. I remember listening to CD players and ruining the CDs by rewinding it so I could write out the lyrics when I was like 4 years old. So that was, it's always sort of been a big thing for me. And obviously these days I work with almost exclusively African-American people and in what I do, and I work in rap music in general. But there was certainly a period of time in my life where I would sing along to the lyrics. They're just the lyrics in my mind, you know. I'm in the car, I sing along to the lyrics. I don't usually ride around with my windows down unless it's summer, you know, so nobody's really going to hear me if I'm yelling in my car in general. And it was actually about 2 or 3 years ago that a friend of mine issued a challenge to me. And I like my friends to challenge me, that he said, you know, it's not your word. And so it is absolutely irrelevant if you are singing along to song lyrics that you didn't write versus singing along to song lyrics that you did write. It's absolutely irrelevant. And I would challenge you to never say that word, singing along or anything. And so since then, I no longer say it. I'll be in the car by myself, and there's a certain part of my mind that goes, nobody's around, just say it, release yourself. And I still won't say it. So I not to toot my own horn, but I am a bit proud of that. But I do understand the point that you were making, Bridgette, as far as two different words almost to an extent, and reclaiming that word in my mind is a beautiful thing. The Black Studies professor that I mentioned in college, his biggest thing was that we had to talk about this openly. So he made a very similar point that you just made, as far as you got to say it. He said, you know, we're here for 45 minutes twice a week or something. You got to say it. I don't care if you're white or black. You have to be a part of this discussion. He said that racism is a shackle. And every time that a person is racist, they're not necessarily being malicious so much as stupid. And stupid is the word he used. And stupid is the word that I would like to use, because racism is so stupid. When people are using the word in a derogatory way, when you hear the language in conversation, the first thought that comes to my mind is not, oh my God. It is a reflection on the person that said it, that this person is dumb. They're being dumb. They're being shackled by this thing that they have learned. We already talked about how racism is learned. So you do your best to try and do the smart thing and not be stupid. So I think that's my
yeah, that's good input. Or offensive to other people and their cultures, and you know, you just respect, and that's something we've gotten away from, is respect, and a high level of respect at that. So, you know, I guess at the end of the day.
I want to make one more quick point. So when we had this sort of racial, I live with two African-American guys. So when we had sort of this conversation when the protests were going on, one of my more radical roommates was sharing a lot of things on social media about sort of Jewish people and how Jewish people control a lot of the wealth. And some of the points that he was making in those posts logically sort of made sense to me. But I know his heart as a human, so I know where he was trying to get at. But the way I sort of, and this is to answer the question, you know, what do you do when you hear racist dialogue? In this case, I felt that a few of his posts stepped over the line as far as, okay, well, now you've taken it too far and you're actually flipping it now to be racist towards Jewish people. And that was something that we actually had a long sort of conversation about. And the point I made to him was that this change that we are trying to make is like a massive mountain. And we're climbing it all as a team. And you're going to need as many people as you can to get to the top of the mountain. So it doesn't behoove you to ostracize a certain group of people just because you feel a certain way about that thing. No matter how right you may be on a few of those points, you have to see the bigger picture in order to see that you have to form a rainbow coalition to sort of make the change. So at any point that you're ostracizing these people, you have to recognize that about yourself and ask yourself the question, is this productive or am I being unproductive right now?
That's an excellent point of articulation. And I was going to lead that right into my next to the last question. And that is, what have you learned about yourself in the worldwide racism discourse? What have you learned about yourselves?
So the other day I was walking back from the bank and these two kids got off at the L stop. I was crossing under the bridge. They look like high school football players. This was a couple of months ago, so it's summertime. They were both walking around with their shirts off. And I felt a part of my soul go, cross the street. You never know. Just cross the street. And then I heard the voice of my Black Studies professor, Professor Madison, say, stop being stupid. So I walked.
If they were white, would you have done the same thing?
Absolutely not. And I know that. I know that the thought would not have crossed my mind.
Okay.
And so I can recognize that about myself when it bubbles up, because that's an emotion. It's an emotional reaction that doesn't actually make any logical sense. And my degree is in science, so I try and base my conclusions on logic and sense. So I can understand that makes no sense at all. That is something that I have learned that is now manifesting itself. And that's where the systemic racism, in my opinion, comes in. So it took about every muscle of force that I had in my mental mind to walk straight. That was it. I didn't have to cross the street. Nothing was going to happen. These kids were probably coming back from football practice. They're probably just walking home. You know, there's nothing dangerous, anything about this situation. And part of the discussion that I was having with my roommates, they sort of broke down in the conversation and were like, Sam, we understand that you are not racist. And I said, no, because you don't understand, because I have those thoughts. And if I have those thoughts and you guys think I'm not racist, then imagine the thoughts that the racist people are having. Imagine the stupid thoughts.
Very interesting. That is very, very interesting.
I don't really think, in my opinion, Sam, that you're racist. I tend to agree with your roommates because it's something inside of you that is like fear. And let's say I've been in many situations like that. I'm in the real estate industry, flipping homes, South Side, huge projects, and I walk. And I'll never forget a day my friend's husband was building a whole community over there, not to mention areas. And I went to visit him on site. He doesn't know what I do personally, actually. It was just for a meeting, a business meeting. And I stayed and parked in my car. He's like, you're not gone yet? I'm texting, calling people. He's like, get out of here. You'll be in big trouble. And I was like, no, I'm fine. Just, tend to your business. And he kept coming back to my car and coming back to my car. And I'm like, now I have to move and go on another block because I have to answer some, messages and emails. And when I worked in those neighborhoods, if you are respectful, if you treat people equally and you do not bother people, then I think you're okay. I think it's your instincts that react based on a situation that you may fear something, whether it's, I think maybe it's them being muscular. Because I have been,
Certainly that. Sorry.
yes, I have been.
I am very weak. Spaghetti arms.
Yes. And so, and I'm not that big either, but I'm saying it's intimidating. So I think that I wouldn't, for future reference, say it's a racist issue, because it is a fear issue. And I feared many things like that. I was on a flight 3 days before September 11th, and in a bomb threat coming back in LaGuardia, and there was a gentleman on the plane. We were there for 27 hours with my son, 27 pounds in my arms for long 2 days. And there was a gentleman making a commotion from the Middle East. And I'm like, we're dead. We are dead. We are dead. That's him. He's one of the bombers. And I never tended to think that. I related it to who caused the bombings, and that was my thought, so I didn't label it as, okay, I'm racist, I'm panicking now because he's Middle Eastern, but he created a ruckus, and what can you do? Your mind wanders and you fear when you're in a situation like that. So to sum it up, for me, it's all about not fearing, being respectful, and just being kind to each other, and educating ourselves and uniting. And I thank you all for this discussion we had today. Pleasure to meet all of you, and looking forward to many more.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I know you guys both have to run, but I wanted to ask this one last question. What would you do today, or what can you do today to make the world a less racist place?
I just want to add, to counter her point. I very much agree that it is not, it's fear and irrationality. And I think that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that's what you're trying to get at. In my mind, I see racism as fear and irrationality. And thus, in my mind, those two things are synonyms. So to answer your question now, Bridgette, I would say the thing that you can do that is most productive as an individual is to note that fear is there, that irrationality is there. You let it bubble up, you greet it like an old friend, and you do not let it control you, and you let it pass, because it's learned, and it's there, and it's involuntary, and it's irrational. That, I think, is the most productive thing you can do beyond impacting your local community. In my mind, I think we only have a certain amount of bandwidth as humans. So anything that you can touch physically that you can change should be your main priority, in my mind.
That's good. I was just going to go with you and Sue and just piggyback off of your dialogue and just say, what you experience and what Sue has experienced, in my opinion, is conditioning and instinct. And you get conditioning from what you see, what you take in. So it could be the news media. It could be all the hyper sensationalization, if that even made sense or is a word. It's just people are oversampled. Blacks are just killing and shooting and killing and shooting. Turn on channel 7. That's all you're going to hear. That's all you're going to hear. So then when you get off the L and you see a group of folks, you're already conditioned that, oh, these people are bad, And so media has a way of conditioning us. Society has a way of conditioning us. And, to your point, Sue, money controls the media and wealth controls the media. So it goes back to this institutionalized ism and conditioning. And it's always been there. But it's up to us to change it and make sure that it doesn't bubble up inside of us so that we can squash it and keep moving and keep it moving. Mike, I want to get to you and ask you that question.
Two things. Every day, try to make a difference in somebody's life who's different. And then for me as an African-American male, as an African-American husband, African-American father, grandfather, pastor, business person, make sure I don't live up to any negative stereotype. It's my personal mission to never fit the description of a negative stereotype of anything to do with racist thoughts. I'm just as black as anybody else, and I'm proud of my culture, proud of my unique experiences. Even though I used to be able to dance, I don't really dance that good anymore, and I never was able to play basketball. But I just think it's very important, at least for me, to never live up to a stereotype and then try to make a difference to somebody that's different.
Yeah. So on that note, does anyone else have anything they'd like to add?
I've had so much fun doing this today. So thank you for inviting me. That was the last thing I just wanted.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bridgette. It was an honor. Thank you.
And giving input. Thank you, Sue. Thank you, Michael, for giving your commentary and your real true grit. I appreciate it. And thanks to Chuck, who had to leave us a little early, for the beautiful article that he wrote and his opinions. Everybody's opinion matters. And I think that once we understand each other and we say these words, like they're saying in social justice circles, say these people's names who've been killed. Say their names. That matters. Say what you have to say so that we can get it out on the table and understand one another. I think it is then that we'll have a greater humanity, a greater civility, and we can, I don't think racism will altogether go away, but I think it'll go to a place where it won't be the norm. And on that note, thank you for joining me today. This is the Souls of Many. Real talk, real news, real people, all the time. Have a great day, guys.